This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 14th of May, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade. Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day. Oh, and by the way, I have been told that I am supposed to tell everyone, because of the way YouTube works, to like, comment, and subscribe on the video. This doesn't matter whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching it after the fact. You need to be subscribing. Click the subscribe button. Click the bell for the notifications. Click the like button.
Yeah, we need those like little icons that come up that everybody else does.
I actually have some. I didn't put them onto my video scenes list here, but I actually have one that says like, comment, and subscribe. So I may need to.
That's what all the cool kids do.
Yeah, I know. I may need to throw that on here. I'm not exactly sure where I have it on my system, but I know that I do have it. I'll have to go back in and find it. I actually have it on another scene collection where it does exist. So I can probably just copy it between. But anyway, like, comment, and subscribe. I've got a couple of things I want to talk about, but rather than direct this like some sort of deranged train conductor, is there anything that you want to cover? I will open the floor to you to see if there's anything that you want to talk about.
Okay, so what I want to talk about is culturally related, but I just binged the first season of The Rings of Power. So
I'm sorry.
You didn't like it?
Look, here's the thing. The Rings of Power in Star Trek, Picard, all of these more recent shows.
Yeah.
Including the new Cleopatra series that Netflix just
see. Now that's a little far afield.
But in any event, this is all just fanfic, right? And especially for the Rings of Power, none of this is in the Silmarillion.
No, that's not true. Some of it is in the Silmarillion. I mean, you're right that it does not closely follow the Silmarillion, and you're right that it is more fanfic. I guess adaptations to, filling in all the spots that the Silmarillion didn't really cover, which then the Silmarillion didn't cover much. It covered the elves. The Rings of Power go far beyond that, but it is interesting. I think it's well acted. It is a little weird that like you have these mixed race couples have white kids and whatever, and black kids. But I mean, whatever, it's fantasy. I mean, who knows how genetics work in that world, and who cares? It's just, it's fun. I think it's fairly consistent. There are definitely cultural elements, and I see this in the Marvel movies. I've seen it in that series. There's been a couple of them, Lucifer. I think there was another one that was kind of based on this idea of, well, they're not evil, they're just misunderstood. So Thanos in, the Marvel movies. I mean, he's got an arguable point. It doesn't necessarily lead to the solution he comes up with, but he's like, hey, look, I saw people starve, and I don't want to let that happen again. That's why I want to do this nefarious thing. Okay. So did Hitler. You know what I mean? The whole Lucifer thing is ridiculous. I mean, you don't humanize Satan. Satan is pure evil. And there is an attempt in this Rings of Power series to give Sauron, I guess, modified limited hangout in a way that he wants to heal the world, or how he wants to heal the world is through power. And that's essentially how all communist socialists think. that with this power, I will make everybody better, but I'll make me a lot better. It's the fatal conceit that we can replace God. And I think it's so pervasive in all of Hollywood, even in these projects that really try to stray away from politics, they still can't get away from the cultural aspects. And they have to cling to this idea that evil isn't really evil. It's just misunderstood goodness.
Okay, so to your point, let's talk about Jordan Neely and being choked to death on the subway. Okay, so here is a guy, who technically kidnapped...
Mind if I smoke?
No. Who technically kidnapped a minor, assaulted an old lady.
I don't think it was technically. I think that was what he was charged with.
Yeah, but in any event, at some point, Daniel Penny, former Marine, 24 years old, just got up, put him in a chokehold, and ended the situation. What I've seen off of the left is a very good encapsulation of what you're talking about here. Because in terms of Jordan Neely, I forget who it was. I think it was Eric Adams, the mayor. The city of New York failed Jordan Neely.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay, maybe. But this idea now, and of course Daniel Penny has now been arrested and charged with manslaughter in this particular case. Although the GoFundMe for his legal defense has taken in
over $1 million. Yeah.
$2 million at this point.
Nice.
So I'm certain he'll be able to forego the services of the local public defender now based on this. But the whole idea that, okay, sure, whatever it was that Jordan Neely was doing, the fact is he had problems. And I think somebody, I forget who it was, I'm just going through tweets that I remember, saying words to the effect of, why didn't somebody just come up and put their arms around him and hug him and saying, hey, you seem to be having a problem. What can I do to help? Instead, we just moved directly.
That was his family and the family's lawyer.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It was.
Nobody asked him, how can I help? You're his family. Why didn't you ask that?
Yeah,
why weren't you doing anything?
The people who are obligated, if indeed such an obligation exists, to offer him help are not the people he is assaulting in public.
Exactly.
They have no obligation to provide help or to try to ameliorate whatever his issues are. They have an absolute right to self-defense. But what we're hearing now is this canonization of Jordan Neely, and the explanation, all the things that, he wasn't a bad person. He was just having trouble. There's an excuse. And the thing that really irritates me about this is we went through this in the 1960s.
Yes.
We went through this whole thing about, well, criminals are misunderstood and the penal system is all bad and we shouldn't just be throwing people in prison. We did this 60 years ago. We went through this and none of it worked. And it ultimately led to the election of Richard Nixon, and then beyond that, Ronald Reagan, because law and order is something that people desire. And whatever the personal problems of any particular criminals may be, the fact is everyone has an absolute duty not to prey on the innocent. And once you do that, you forgo this understanding, you forgo this love, your victims have no responsibility to anyone but themselves.
You at least forgo it in responsible society. You need to be removed from society. And that's what we used to do. Now, granted, the mental health system that we had in the 40s, 50s, 60s.
Yeah, that's gone.
Not ideal. Was not well run. Nor was it particularly helpful. But when we had something, I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's just split it evenly. It was something like 1 million people in the judicial system, so prisons and jails and whatever, and then another 1 million in mental health institutions. Well, we emptied those mental health institutions, and now we have almost nobody in those, and we have millions, upwards of 2 million in our criminal system, and that doesn't change because we keep kicking people out of the criminal system back onto the streets. Jordan Neely is, I think it's arguable, a victim of this failed system that does not excuse his crimes, nor give him any vindication for how he acted or how he treated people. But it is, I think, something that needs to be underscored with respect to this tragedy. And it is a tragedy. The guy needed help. He couldn't get it. His family certainly wasn't giving it to him. The state of New York wasn't giving it to him. The city of New York was not giving it to him. Okay, so the system failed him. And Daniel Penny is supposed to stand trial for that? That's beyond ridiculous.
Well, the message that it sends, of course, is that if you attempt to defend yourself, and anything bad happens, now you are criminally liable. Now you're the bad guy. Now Daniel Penny is the murderer.
Right.
All he did is defend other people, especially in this case, 2 people that could not defend themselves. So I think it's something out of the Talmud that says, if you show compassion to those who don't deserve it, you'll fail to show compassion to those who do. And this is one of those cases of misplaced compassion. Daniel Penny is, in my view, a hero. He ended the threat, and
as is the guy that helped him. They're saying that he's a former Army medic or something. He helped out as well. Daniel Penny took, most of the brunt of it, but that other guy was there to help. They both helped Penny after, he passed out and was alive. They worked to make him comfortable and make sure he kept breathing and whatever else. Matter of fact, this whole line of thinking that the chokehold is what killed him, I know there's a medical examiner report that determined that, but it was a New York medical examiner. I'd love to get an independent report. We don't actually know that. And even if that is what ultimately killed him, Daniel Penny was acting in defense of himself and others, and really probably mostly in defense of others. He's got witnesses on that train who are thanking him and saying, yeah, this guy was a menace. Andy Ngo went from, Post Millennial, went and looked up some age-old Reddit feeds and whatever else about this guy going back 10 years. It's been known for quite some time that this guy is a menace. He had 42 or 44 arrests for some violent behavior, and nothing was done. He was all over the state's radar, and they did nothing. And now they're going to pin that on Daniel Penny? That's just what they want, is to make any action of self-defense illegal. I mean, that's essentially what they're looking to do. They did the same thing with the bodega owner, who, that guy attacked him with a gun. He stabbed him. And then there was somebody else too in New York.
Yeah, it is the criminalization of self-defense. The idea is that, first of all, the fundamental idea, the one to which you referred to initially, is that there is a reason that these people are doing bad things. And if only we can address that reason, we can stop people from doing bad things, which I think is a faulty view of human nature. But if that is true, then the logical corollary of that stupid idea is that any act of self-defense against these people is therefore illegitimate. You have a duty to allow them to victimize you in whatever way that they decide to do. And then afterwards, the justice system, for which everyone has immense respect these days, the justice system will provide justice. You have no, not only no responsibility to, but no right to exercise justice on your own behalf in terms of your own self-defense. It all comes part and parcel. So your obligation in this worldview is to just be the victim and just let them do to you whatever they're going to do to you, and we'll come back, and you got to trust us. We'll fix it later. Well, you know what? You can't fix it later. Either I'm dead, or my money is gone, or I'm beaten and in the hospital, or I'm
molested,
raped, or whatever. And I guess, I just got to deal with that as part of the price of living in a civil society. No. The price of living in a civil society is being able to defend yourself and to take out evildoers as necessary when they commit evil acts. It's not the people who are innocent, who are being attacked, who have a responsibility to do anything other than defend themselves. But this entire worldview encapsulated by this idea that, well, if only we understood Sauron. No. Sauron...
Right. Exactly.
Let's get down into the weeds here for those of you who are big Tolkien fans. Sauron was evil. Sauron was one of the Maiar created by Melkor, who is the Lord of the Rings version of Satan, of Lucifer. He was one of his chief servants. And when Melkor was taken out by the rest of the Valar, Sauron just came and stepped into his place. Sauron's only interest was his own power and lording it over all of Middle-earth. That's literally all he wanted. There was no, at least in Tolkien, there was no justification. There was no Thanos-like Malthusian view of the universe where we have to do unpleasant things to make things better for everyone who remains. It was just pure evil. But of course, the left is really uncomfortable with the idea of evil. And because if it's true, that means that you have a responsibility to do something about it.
Well, evil only stands on one side, and it's those who refuse to do things for the children, for humanity. Even though none of these people, or at least not many of them, actually go out there and do anything to effectuate their preferred outcomes. They stand by and think that because we pay a lot of taxes, well, that's who should do it. And everybody should do it this way. You shouldn't be allowed to even opt for another way.
The thing is, people will not willingly live under a regime like that. People will not willingly live under a regime where criminals are allowed to... Which is
why it has to be forced, right?
Yeah, where criminals are allowed to go free, and if you defend yourself and hurt somebody, you are now criminally liable for your own self-defense. And by the way, we've seen this in England in any number of cases.
Yeah,
where,
that's right.
People have been attacked, they've been the victim of home invasion robberies, they fought back, someone has died, and they go straight to prison, basically, because they shouldn't have defended themselves.
Tommy something... lived on a farm, gotten broken into several times. And this was, I don't know, at least a decade ago, maybe more, maybe 15, 18 years ago. And because he finally defended, after getting broken into many, many times over, finally defended himself. I don't even think he killed anybody. He maimed somebody. They put him in jail, not the attackers. It's a complete reversal of the whole concept of human rights.
And people will
or at least the Judeo-Christian concept of
people will only live under such a system as long as they feel compelled to. But sooner or later, if a state does not provide, the state really, we only expect as a fundamental duty, even if it does nothing else, to supply one thing, and that is security. And alongside that, a system of justice that imposes that vision of security.
They're supposed to be interconnected.
Exactly. And if the state can't provide that, and indeed does exactly the opposite, and begins to act unjustly, people are not going to put up with that indefinitely. Sooner or later, people are just going to say no. Enough is enough. Now, it has to get pretty bad. It has to personally affect them, and their lives have to be pretty poor before they decide it's time to change it and just say no, usually, because nobody wants trouble. Nobody wants to cause a problem. Everybody just wants to get along and get on with living
Very
their
few
life.
people want to act up for a cause that might blow up in their face.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole host of things that people might grab a rifle and head up into the hills to start raising an army, but they don't.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Because everybody realizes what the possible dangers are of running around in the hills gathering an army. Things can get real dark.
Well, especially in today's climate. But it like you said, when it touches them personally, and it's seemingly happening more often, for really just not understandable reasons. The thing that happened to those Catholics up in Pennsylvania, who had a SWAT team come and arrest a guy who had offered to turn himself in. The infiltration and stuff they did down in Richmond, because they were trad Catholics. There's a really imperious force coming out of the federal government that is forcing people to make decisions. And they're getting bolder about it.
Oh, yeah. The president just this week says, the biggest terrorist threat facing America is white nationalism. Okay.
Then we had dutifully that whole Patriot Front group go marching around.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. In fact, the Patriot Front group running around, and I've got this, and I actually wanted to show this because it is it's interesting, and we've got
they
there.
Look like a bunch of NPCs.
Well, there's a couple of things about it. First of all, this is probably the most fit group of white supremacists I've ever seen. These fellows look like they are ready to drop at any minute.
Right.
Or
that they could at
drop
least
down any minute. They certainly could. There were about 200 of these guys there. Now, purportedly, the entire national membership of the Patriot Front is 300 people. So basically, they got 2/3 of their membership to basically leave their hometowns, go all the way to Washington, D.C., and march. And hell, half of these guys look more fit than the cops that were following them around in the mall. And interestingly enough, in all of this marching, people were commenting on Twitter about the way this all seems to be going down. So now here's the one thing though. There is the guy who this is still running, so let me turn that off. So this is the guy who actually runs the Patriot Front. Now, he was actually there. Well, that is because I don't really care to hear what he says. Let's turn him down. But here is this fellow. I mean, he actually did give a speech. He was there. But I'm very curious about why these guys are all masked, why they're hiding their identity. I think several people wrote on Twitter.
And who's that guy?
And wrote on Twitter that patriots don't hide their identity.
Well, damn straight.
This guy is apparently the real Patriot Front guy. And indeed, this appears to be a Patriot Front video. Appears to be. Is it? I don't know.
Who's that guy?
Again, go back to this. I think he's the main president of the...
But what's his name? Who
Front.
Is he? Where does he come from?
I'd have to go back and look at it again. I was looking them up earlier.
Well,
this week.
Here's my point, though. There's absolutely no reporting on this. None.
Yeah, we don't know who these people are.
Enrique Torres, we know more about. And he's a supposed white supremacist, even though he's Afro-Cuban in his own description. What, what,
Well,
who are these people?
again, I can't help but think of the stunt that Project Lincoln pulled during the Virginia gubernatorial election
Oh, I remember that very, very vividly.
when they had these white supremacists in white shirts and khaki trousers, holding
One
up
of
their,
who was a black guy.
yeah, one of whom was a black fella at a Youngkin event saying, white supremacists support Youngkin.
Yeah.
And of course, as it was initially reported, these white supremacists show up.
Yeah.
And then it took about 48 hours, which, by the way, whatever news headline you see, wait 48 hours. Because
Yeah.
48 hours later, the story was, oh, okay, this was all just a put up job.
If you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, done by Project Lincoln. These aren't white supremacists, and they're, basically just crisis actors.
Well, they might be white supremacists, but they're
Well,
certainly not they're certainly not in support of Youngkin.
No, they're not. So, and by the way, when you talk about the reporting on it, that's the problem. Look, there's three things. This is one. The second one is the Joe Biden corruption stuff that Jim Comer released on Wednesday. And the other being what's happening at the border now, where
What? There's a crisis down there?
well, not
I've been
according to
assured by the ranking member of the House that this is a made up issue.
yeah, exactly. And Secretary Mayorkas came out and said, "Hey, look, since we got rid of Title 42, border crossings are down by half."
50%. Yeah.
Is that true? I don't know. I do know that my wife watches some of these YouTube channels that actually have set up live cameras on the border to see what's going on there, and she says that it doesn't look like it has dropped by half. It looks like it is as bad or worse than it was prior to Title 42. Now, granted, even though Title 42 is gone, the Biden administration came up with this new policy where
That late, yeah.
that's going to go for another 2 years, which is basically Title 42
laws.
and everything but name.
Yeah, that just means that there was always laws there to get control of this.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There's always been the laws to fix these problems. Look, let's talk about guns in the same context. There are plenty of laws that define who is even allowed to have a gun, and do we enforce them? Apparently not, because most of the time, not every time. Certainly, this last incident, the guy in Allen, Texas, he was a legal possessor of firearms. But in the 10 times before that, it was always people who were not legally authorized to have firearms.
Yeah, that's right.
And,
matter of fact, almost every time it's somebody who's not legally allowed to own firearms, and we do nothing about that. We already have these laws in the books.
Yeah, they exist, but they're clearly not being enforced. Or even more frighteningly, they're unenforceable.
Well, there could be that too.
And if that is true, then you can take away your fantasy of, confiscating everybody's guns and having a gun-free America. Because if you can't even enforce the laws that we have now, you'll never be able to pull 300 million guns off of the streets. It will just never, ever happen.
They couldn't even do that in Australia. They claimed that cleaned the country of guns. There was something like maybe 5% that pulled in. 95% were lost in boat accidents and whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
No, they didn't. It didn't do shit. Actually, I don't know if you saw. So Everything's Sunny in Philadelphia, a hilarious show. Very irreverent, but they actually, I was absolutely shocked by this. They actually kind of did a little bit in one of their shows about smug gun grabbers. And I'm like, oh, we want the man killer. We want one of those. And so I can shoot as many innocent people as I want, which in any real context, there's nobody that's going to sell you a gun once you start saying stuff like that. But then they end up failing the background check. And they're like, what?
Yeah, well, it
But
was like that.
we're supposed to just be able to get these over the counter. What I don't understand.
Yeah, well, it was like that reporter from either the Washington Post or New York
I
Times, I
remember
don't
that.
remember,
Yeah,
who said, "Well, I'm going to go and get a gun and
in 15 minutes.
just to show how easy it is." And they were like, "No, we can't sell you a gun. You didn't pass the background check. Get out."
Right.
And so he found a gun impossible to obtain. So, I guess the background check system is working.
When they use it, the guy who shot up Dylan Root, is that his name? The guy who shot up the black church in South Carolina, the racist guy.
Yeah.
He should not have been able to legally own a gun, but they didn't process the background check properly.
Oh, yeah, that's
It was
right.
sent to NCIS, but they were like, we got better things to do or something. I don't know. They never actually checked them out.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
again, we have plenty of laws on the books. The problem is not enough laws. The problem is enforcement of the laws. Same as the border crisis. Same as the drug crisis. We have plenty of laws. Having enough laws is not the problem.
And here's the thing.
Enforcement.
Mayorkas came out this week and he said, well, Congress needs to act to fix this.
Yeah, what a bunch of bullshit.
Congress already fixed it. We already have this law. It is not a law that I particularly think is effective, but it's the Immigration Act of 1986. It's pretty clear. What we are not doing is enforcing the Immigration Act of
the
Immigration Reform Act of 1986.
Including the provisions that said, hey, we're going to build a wall.
Yeah, that wall, 1986, by the way. We've been waiting for that wall.
Trump got like about maybe 2/3 of it built.
Yeah, maybe.
Of the extended wall.
Yeah, but we're not enforcing the laws that we have. And by the way, the tsunami of people that have been coming, so irrespective of what Secretary Mayorkas says has been happening since Title 42 expired.
Lying piece of shit.
Well, we'll get to that. But despite the fact, last week it was 10,000 a day that they were apprehending. But of course, how many are they not apprehending? CBP today came out with a big announcement. Hey, we apprehended a fella who's an Afghani who is on the terrorist wanted list.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. How many others made it in that you haven't caught across the 1,500-mile border with Mexico?
Well, you know how they came up with that number. So was it this week or last week when KJP, Corinne Pierre, said something about, oh, yeah, we've lowered the unauthorized or illegal immigration by 95%. Okay, what? Where did you get that number? Oh, we were just talking about that one cohort of Venezuelans, Cubans, and whatever else. It's like, so you just changed their status. You didn't actually stop them from coming in. You just changed them from illegal to legal at the border. That doesn't change the number of people coming in. It just changes their status. And that's the whole thing they did with the 1,500 the National Guardsmen that they sent, that Biden sent down to the border. They're not there in any kind of law enforcement capacity. They're there to process these people, give them court dates, and then see them off into the middle of the nation, never to be seen again.
Yeah, with court dates as late as 2027.
Right.
And by the way, the Border Patrol's union doesn't appear to agree with Karine Jean-Pierre. She's the Baghdad Bob of the Biden administration. So the Border
What's his
Patrol,
name, Hutton?
Yeah, I believe so. The Border Patrol agents themselves are pushing back pretty strongly on the administration's.
I mean, at this point, other than pride,
but of
I
course,
don't even know why they keep their jobs. They're not supported at all.
No, they're not. But I mean, they do have these nice, cushy government jobs with great retirement. So let's not get ridiculous here. Um, it's more effective to stay working and then just have your union complain about it on Twitter. But of course, the news will cover what Majorca says. It won't cover what the Border Patrol Agents Union is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's all a snow job. Well, and that kind of leads into another topic about the media itself. I mean, this is an age old. As a matter of fact, I would venture to say that 90% of the right blogosphere was created just because of the absolute bias in the news. And the bias in the news has only gotten worse. These people are absolutely shameless. They have literally no morals or ethics whatsoever. They lie to us constantly. They prop up a senile, decrepit, ineffective president because they just don't want the other side to get any power. This is all about power. And they are part of that power structure. And they know it, and they won't, they're not going to let go of it.
But here's all of these immigrants, and they're illegal aliens, by the way, according to the text of the law.
Absolutely.
So that is the term we will use. All of these illegal aliens who are coming into the country, even those who are getting caught, they're now just being shuffled off to where we don't know. They're just being released onto the streets in all these communities everywhere in the country. We have no idea where they were. There were videos that were taking that they're just putting these people on buses and shipping them off somewhere. Where? Who knows? The city of New York expecting many more migrants, and
I was going to say, because we know where the ones that Abbott and DeSantis send off.
Governor Abbott knows where a lot of them are going. The ones that the state of Texas are picking up, he wants to ship them off to New York. And in New York, Eric Adams has decided he's going to kick a whole bunch of, homeless American Vietnam veterans out of the Roosevelt Hotel so that he can house illegal aliens there.
Well, of course. I mean, obviously priorities are priorities.
It's just, it's crazy world. And sure, there's a lot of women and children coming over, but boy, there sure are a lot of military-aged men in that cohort that are coming over into this country.
Well, somebody's got to control all those women and children in the trafficking process.
Yeah, and the trafficking process. Basically, everything that is happening at the border, all of these people coming across are in one way or another being trafficked. Whether it's just coyotes who are getting paid to take people across the border voluntarily, or whether they have some sort of hooks on these people after they get here and they're taking their whatever income that they might make when they get here. Let's not even talk about the sex trafficking that is going on at the border. It's not just about the fact that there's a whole bunch of foreigners coming into the United States. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who just hate the idea of a whole bunch of foreigners coming into the United States. There's a significant cohort of people who think,
some of them made their voice heard in South Chicago just this week.
Yeah. But that aside, all of the other problems that arise with an uncontrolled border. And you can talk about the federal government's, their constant bemoaning about fentanyl. Well, you know what? If we had a secure border, we wouldn't worry about fentanyl coming across it because we'd stop it. Human trafficking, we wouldn't have to worry about that because with a secure border, we stop it. But with an insecure border, all of these problems, the smuggling, whether it's drugs or people, the cartels reach coming into the southern states, and these MS-13 gang members making their way up here and taking control of neighborhoods and what have you. All of this is, even if we, loved all the foreigners and we wanted any good foreigners who could possibly come here to come here, the fact that the border is insecure gives rise to all of these other ancillary problems that are unrelated to the race or nationality of the people who are coming across. I mean, these are real serious problems that having an open border facilitates. The United States government is essentially facilitating human trafficking and drug trafficking and fentanyl and all of that because they simply won't enforce the law. Whether, again, this is because of misplaced compassion or whatever it might be, all of these problems that are happening at the border are happening because we're allowing it to happen.
But again, I think the emphasis there is despite the law.
Yeah,
We have
despite
laws
the law,
already
we have
in
the
place. Yeah, we've already got this. So the only thing that's missing here is the willingness, the duty to actually enforce that law, which, I mean, is impeachable. Not that that is ever going to happen, just because of the way politics works, unfortunately. But I mean, these are fully impeachable, non enforcement of laws, which the executive branch takes an oath to do.
To ensure that the laws are faithfully executed.
And that's obviously not happening. And, you know, the argument of prosecutorial discretion only goes so far when it's just so blatantly obvious what they're doing. Oh, the border is secure, says Mayorkas. No, we have operational control over the border, says Mayorkas. Yet his guy who's actually in charge of doing that says, no, we do not have operational control. And it's fucking obvious. We get videos every day of thousands upon thousands of people pouring in. And we do nothing about it.
And at some point, you have to begin asking the question, is this incompetence or malevolence?
Well, and I've long ago answered that for myself, that this is exactly what they want. This isn't incompetence.
And then
this isn't misguidance.
And now
this
you have
is what they want to do.
And now you have to ask why.
Well, we talked about that last week, right? That cui bono, right?
Who benefits?
Well, and we know that for the people who will actually work, they drive down wages. That makes all lower echelons of labor cheaper. The Chamber of Commerce types love that. That's why they're all for open borders and for much more mass migration.
Yeah, which, by the way, has been part of the bipartisan consensus in Washington, D.C. since 1986. Right. Whether it is the pro-business Republicans or the Democrats or what have you, because Democrats receive a lot of people think of the Republicans as the corporate party. Guess what party gets?
Yeah, that's not even close.
Yeah, guess what party gets the majority of corporate donations?
Right.
There is a bipartisan consensus that the way that we are told, well, there are just jobs Americans won't do. Well, not true. There are jobs America won't do at the current wages.
Right.
But there are no jobs that Americans won't do. And so the idea is, well, we'll just have all these immigrants come in and do all these jobs that Americans don't want to do. And that's really a code phrase. That's a code phrase for we need a permanent underclass of serfs, of helots, who will do all of the dirty jobs for us for almost no money and who have no legal recourse, right? If they are...
Did we used to call those slaves?
Well, yeah.
I remember there was a time we called those slaves.
Yeah, but
at least indentured servants.
All this talk about, well, we have to allow all these migrants to come in here and work is really just code word for we need a permanent underclass whose labor we can exploit. I mean, right. If you want to talk about a Marxist interpretation of capitalism, well, there you go. There it is in big letters. It's not Americans who are being exploited in the same way, but it's capitalism exploiting somebody. And the thing is, it's not really capitalism, right?
No, it's crony capitalism.
It's cronyism. It's not capitalism. And so the politicians and the Chamber of Commerce types, as you referred to them, are all in on, well, we just have to have basically unrestricted immigration so that, who's going to, it was a Democrat who earlier this week says, we need these people to clean our hotel rooms and pick our vegetables.
Yeah, I remember
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know. We need a permanent underclass that we can exploit.
Who's going to clean our toilets?
And a permanent underclass that we can exploit who we expect will vote Democrat, by the way, just saying.
Oh, that's absolutely the expectation.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
I mean, Rui Teixeira wrote a book almost 20 years ago now.
That's right. That's been that long.
That described it.
Yep. What was it? Something about the demographic, the permanent.
Yeah, the permanent Democratic majority.
Yeah, right. I mean, and it was all about demographics and about, hey, we get these people in here, they're going to vote Democrat forever. And we'll overwhelm the white people. That was the beginning of the whole replacement theory.
Well, yeah, that's the weird thing.
What's really even worse about that is that it wasn't prescient enough. It didn't understand that who you're going to replace first are the poor people. So unfortunately, that's still your Hispanics, your blacks, some of the Asians, although most Asians in America do way better than whites. But there are still some who are in that underclass. That's who gets exploited first. It drives their wages down. It drives their ability to find jobs down. That's who's getting competed with. It's not some techie in Silicon Valley. It's not some middle manager in Indiana. It's the people who do real fucking work and actually have to, put their back into things.
And they're the ones who see their wages decline. They're the ones who see their job opportunities go away because, they would price themselves out of the market.
That's right.
If they demanded the wage that they deserved. And you have to wonder how much of the stagnation of wages in this country that has occurred over the past 30 or 40 years can be attributable to the influx in
I bet Cesar Chavez could tell you.
Yeah, I bet he could. Yeah, so I mean this is intentional. This is
absolutely, it's intentional.
And
it's absolutely, intentional.
I was reading a news article, and by the way, this is now de rigueur. Anytime you see it mentioned, so and so made comments that seemed to reference the Great Replacement theory, which fact checkers have debunked as an untrue conspiracy theory. Okay, sure, it's an untrue conspiracy theory that a Democratic operative published an entire book on in 2006. So was
okay, what do we do now, lefties?
Yeah, what do we do now? I mean, and by the way, review that in light of what we learned last year from the Labor Party, who finally came out and admitted, yes, one of the reasons why we wanted more immigration to Britain.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. That's awesome.
Was to increase the votes of labor. I mean, they just came out and said it. They admitted it. Okay, 20 years too late, but they admitted it. I guess 15 years ago, that would have been a conspiracy theory too, but now we know it to be a fact because the Labor Party admitted that was why they wanted as much immigration into Britain as they got. Didn't work out exactly the way that they thought it might. However, we at least now know the truth. And so now every time Great Replacement, they talk about Tucker Carlson, he appears to be referring to the Great Replacement theory, this conspiracy theory. Okay, it's not a conspiracy when you have a Democratic operative, Rui Teixeira,
saying it out loud?
Who is saying it out loud, saying this is what's going to happen. We're going to allow a whole bunch of immigrants in. We expect, because they're all coming from socialist countries, that they're all going to go to the left.
And he wasn't the only one. I mean, that was a big deal.
No, but that
the demographic shift. I totally remember that. But it was a huge deal.
Yeah, but that was then, as Jerry Brown once said. This is now. And so now it is a discredited conspiracy theory. Well, 17 years ago, it wasn't a discredited conspiracy theory. 17
It
years
was all
ago,
the gospel.
it was the proposition of a well-known Democratic operative who was saying, "This is how we will create a permanent Democratic Party
And actually, a
majority
pretty smart guy
in the
I mean,
United States."
Roy
Yeah,
Texera is not. He's not unknown. Uh, I'm sure he believed what he was preaching. Um, I think he was wrong, but I I don't. He was not trying to force an idea out there. He was describing what he truly saw as a demographic shift. And I mean, as far as we knew, that was right.
well,
There were a lot of things we didn't count on.
it was certainly plausible at the
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
But of course, now it's all just a discredited conspiracy.
I don't want Roy Texera to get like some sort of like he was an evil madman. I don't think that of him at all.
No,
I think he's an honest broker.
I think he was just saying, "This is what's going to happen. We're going to."
I mean, he may have been wrong, but I think that he had some legitimate reasons to think what he did. He over predicted what would actually happen, but whatever. That was the plan. That was literally the plan. Was replacement theory. It wasn't Tucker Carlson who came up with that shit. It was the Democrats who came up with that shit. And they followed it to a T, and they're still following it to a T.
Yeah, but we're supposed to just say, "No, this is all conspiracy. We can't listen to that anymore."
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly things become conspiracies and not conspiracies. I'm old enough to remember when just even hinting that the coronavirus might have came out of a lab in China was just some outlandish conspiracy theory. There's no proof of that.
Or that wearing masks was ineffectual and maybe even harmful. There's a new corollary to the Cochrane study that just came out of Germany that said, yeah, actually, you know what? You're sucking up about somewhere between like 65 and 85% more carbon dioxide with
Right.
that mask on than you would otherwise. 8 times is toxic. So maybe it's not such a good idea.
Yeah, but we are told and told over again by the government that they know what they're doing and this is how we should do things. And so many people are just willing to believe it. And yet we're being told this stuff by people we know to be liars, like Anthony Fauci, who back in March of 2020 told us there was no reason to wear masks.
Yeah.
That's not really going to help you at all.
Well, I just told you that because I didn't want you sucking up all the masks.
Yeah, and then a month later he says, yeah, that wasn't untrue. You do need the masks. But if we'd have told you that, you'd have gone out and bought them and we couldn't have had some for, the people who really needed them in our
In fact, you should probably now be doing double masks.
Yeah, exactly. So the person who just admitted to lying to us about masks is now the person we're supposed to trust. Oh, and by the way, Donald Trump trusted him implicitly. Donald Trump did everything Fauci asked.
That's a serious strike against him. I agree. Now, I will say this, that he didn't know any better. He was trying to trust, and that's
but here's the thing: neither did Fauci. The reason they call it the novel
rule him. Yeah, I mean, he didn't have any knowledge otherwise. Fauci totally lied to him, and he believed it. But the ultimate that is on Trump. I agree. I mean, I think, especially with the attacks he's taken on, like DeSantis and whatever, which should be interesting. So I think DeSantis is going to actually jump into the race in the next couple of weeks, probably after Memorial Day.
Yeah, he just got a new campaign headquarters, and the expenditures now exceed the minimal federal campaign limits, so he's now having to declare those.
Yeah, and you know what? Good. The fact of the matter is, whichever one of them wins, I'm definitely not voting for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, whoever ends up at the finish line.
Yeah. I mean,
I would much rather Ron DeSantis. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's shown that he has that Trumpian will to fight, but
without the
he's
baggage.
much better at it. And without the baggage. That's actually a great point. That's actually probably the premier point, is that he doesn't have the baggage.
Well,
Trump gets himself into so much fucking trouble.
Yeah, here's the thing. So Donald Trump has been, and he hasn't done it in the last week or so, but he was hitting Ron DeSantis on calling him Lockdown Ron.
Yeah,
that
right.
Ron DeSantis was the one who locked down Florida, blah, 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 blah. Well, if he tries to pull that in the primary campaign, all Ron DeSantis has to do is pull up Donald Trump's own tweets.
Yeah, that's and I think that Trump actually knows that he's going to float everything he can to try to like score points. I don't think DeSantis is his usual debating partner. DeSantis has this sort of just so based way of saying, that doesn't matter. What matters is this. I mean, he is really based. It makes me like him a lot. And I think it makes a lot of people like him a lot. I don't think that once he gets into the race, it's going to take that long to start reversing the positions of Trump and DeSantis. But again, I don't anticipate that the GOP nomination is going to be as contentious as the one with the Dems. They have a lot on their hands, and they know they're supporting a complete moron with severe mental issues. They don't want Kamala Harris, so what are they going to do?
Gavin
Newsom. Are they going to go with RFK Jr.?
Or Gavin Newsom?
Or please go with Gavin Newsom.
Who has managed in a single year to turn a massive budget surplus in the state of California to a $32 billion deficit in a year.
Please go with Gavin Newsom. Matter of fact, that might be the thing that saves America, is Gavin Newsom to put his policies up against Ron DeSantis policies. That would be absolutely, or even Donald Trump policies. That would be fantastic, because it's going to, other than the true believers, those people which are the mass majority of voters, pretty ignorant of politics, which I don't blame them. That's not a derogatory comment. They got more important things to deal with in their life.
Well, also, we built a government that was supposed to liberate people from having to think about politics.
Exactly. Well, we were supposed to build that government.
That was the government we were supposed to have. It's the government we used to have. It's not the government we have anymore, but now we have this cultural holdover of, well, who cares what the federal government does? I'll look at it every 4 years. We'll figure out who to vote for president, and then I can ignore it for the next 4 years. It would be nice if that was a country we still lived in.
It'd be awesome if that was the country we still lived in. But unfortunately, I don't necessarily want to go into this whole thing tonight, but it should be a future topic. The power struggle between the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the presidency is starting to come into some real loggerheads, something that's going to have to be solved. And who's going to solve it? That creates a real issue. I know you brought up Marbury versus Madison last week and the whole judicial supremacy thing. It's going to get interesting over the next few years because I think there's a direct clash between what the executive wants, what the Congress wants, and what the Supreme Court will allow. for right or wrong, this is a battle that needs to be had.
Well, it's a battle Congress could win if they would only decide that they wanted to.
If they wouldn't, if they would stop dealing their powers to the executive, yes. But as I brought up last week, and I think the name of the case is Polaris. I couldn't remember it last week, but I think the name of the case is Polaris. I think there's a devastating decision to come down for the whole administrative state that's going to take away Chevron deference and reduce them to what they should be, an entity that is subject to severe oversight by Congress, because Congress gives them the money. And if you don't tell us what you're doing and you don't, actually come clean with us, we're not giving you the money.
Well, see, you say that, but that brings us directly to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is that this week, Jim Comey in the House came out with a, not to be confused with the former director of the FBI, James Comey. They have the same name, don't they? They're both James Comey.
You know what? That never occurred to me.
Oh, okay. Well, that gets confusing. In any event, he came out with this very long report that basically showed that every Biden family member, including his now 29-year-old granddaughter, had received at least $10 million in payments from foreign entities here and there. Through
10 million across all of them.
Across all of them through this web of shell companies. And I guess it's good that we have a someone who specializes in corporate law on the podcast, because you generally don't.
Wait, who's that? Oh, yeah, right.
You generally don't create a web of shell companies because you're trying to be transparent about your expenditure of money or your receipt of revenues. For one family, that's a hell of a lot of shell companies who are all just being created and dissolved for sort of willy-nilly. And they're all receiving this money, all of it happening while Joe Biden is vice president. And it certainly looks suspicious. Now, the thing is, here's how the New York Times characterized it.
Yeah, right.
No evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. So after months of investigation and many public accusations of corruption against Mr. Biden and his family, the first report of the premier House GOP inquiry showed no proof of such conduct. Well, it certainly shows prima facie evidence of such conduct. And here's what I don't understand. Do they expect that any of these records would actually put down in their accounting, oh, here's the $500,000 bribe payment to Joe? People in their accounting who are using shell companies to obfuscate the movement of funds back and forth between family members generally are smart enough not to actually write down, felonies as part of their normal double entry bookkeeping. So the fact that they didn't explicitly say, hey, Joe Biden got this money, that's not proof that there's no corruption or that Joe Biden didn't get any money. That's just proof that they were just smart enough not to record actual illegal activity in these transactions. But we know that it happened. We have banking records that show all of this. There are certainly questions to be asked, and I guarantee you, if this was Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric who were doing this, we'd be the New York Times would have a lot more intellectual curiosity about what was going on behind the scenes.
Well, that's absolutely true. Matter of fact, we saw that in 2016, 2017. But no, you're absolutely right. There is no legal reason to run it through that many.
Oh, and by the way, I'm told in the comments, don't forget the 80 visits to the White House.
Well, that's relevant. That's absolutely relevant if it ever comes to a trial. There is no legitimate business purpose that I know of, and maybe my knowledge is decrepit, but you don't run it through all these things unless you're trying to hide transactions.
Because, and here's the thing.
Well, hold on, before you get there, there's also no indication of what these transactions actually involved. There's no indication that there was actually a service, a product, anything provided.
Yeah.
What were they selling?
Yeah, the two things. If we go and look at Donald Trump's foreign investments, the Trump Organization tells us what business was conducted. We can tell if a building was built or if Donald Trump licensed his name to put on a hotel, whatever it was. We know the business that the Trump Organization is involved in foreign countries. We might not like it, but at least we know what it is. In this case, we don't know what the business was. What are these services that are being provided? What kind of consulting is being... We have no idea. There doesn't appear to be any record of that. And the more important point when it comes to these shell companies is not only is there no legitimate business reason to have all of these shell companies unless you're trying to hide something, you don't create these shell companies if you don't have to, because it complicates your accounting.
That's absolutely right.
Because now it makes it harder for you to figure out, where's my revenue going, who got paid for what, because this makes your life a hell of a lot more complex when it comes, April 15th every year, and you've got to put in all of the tax
documents. It's not even
documents.
April 15th because
no, it's every quarter.
January 15th, because a lot of these are inks, and so you've got to have your shit together probably by August of the previous year.
And by the way, every one of these corporations have to file tax returns.
That's exactly right.
It's a lot easier if you have a company.
Even if they're informational returns, they still have to file returns. And so there's a lot of planning that goes into this.
Yeah. And by the way,
there has to be some sort of explanation. There's got to be a code to tell you, or to tell the IRS what this money is for, where it goes, how it goes there. This is an extraordinarily complicated system of hiding money. The amount of fees that the Biden family had to pay in order to orchestrate this thing had to be enormous. Especially when it comes to international tax law, which is super opaque, highly subject to, open interpretation. They have to know who they can deal with, what they can deal with, how to characterize things. It's an enormous complication. So in order to move those millions of dollars around, they had to have help. They absolutely had to have help, and they had to have government help. Quite frankly, it was done seemingly effortlessly, and that suggests to me that they had government help.
It's a lot easier if you have a business to have all of your revenues come into that business, and then you only have to file one tax return every year, and then you know where everything is. If you're building...
all the 1099s come to that business.
Yeah, exactly.
All the W-2s come to that business. W-9s, like all the stuff comes to that particular place. When you start dealing with this web, well, now you're obviously hiding something.
Yeah, you don't create 26 shell companies with the intention of doing business in a straightforward manner.
There are legitimate reasons for international tax reasons to say, okay, look, these widgets came from Bermuda to Bahia, and then we fastened this thing to him and then sent him to Jamaica. They fastened this thing, and then they finally got him to America where we did the last thing. There are actually legitimate reasons to do that because of international business tax. But there are no widgets here.
Yeah, this is not manufacturing, and we're not having to worry about countries with VAT taxes where we've got
Right.
where in that particular case, it would be easier to track VAT taxes through those organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
And then your final organization, where your last is in the United States, where there is no VAT. And so then all of those, but then again, those aren't shell corporations, because at the end of the day,
No,
those
they can't be
corporations are
because
always
right,
reporting
because each
upwards
one of them
to
has
your
to
final.
pay taxes. You have to show you pay the taxes, and you have to then, so that basically, if you pay taxes in the Bahamas or wherever, you show that to the American government, and then they say, okay, well, you've exceeded whatever our taxes are, so you don't have to pay us any tax.
Right,
That's how it works.
this is not manufacturing.
No,
I
this is services.
Yeah, this is services, and we don't even know what the services are.
Services?
And by the way, I'm because we're now talking about 2012 when what's her name, Alexandra Biden, Joe Biden's granddaughter, was 20. I'm not so sure what international business expertise she brought to the table at 20 years of age.
She's a super. I mean, she's been sitting by her uncle's knee for forever.
Maybe that's
He's
it.
a master of international relations.
But in adjunct with this, Comey's House committee also subpoenaed the FBI for a record of a whistleblower who apparently has told Congress via the mechanism set up with whistleblowing that the FBI in fact does have investigative documents that
Like 1023, right?
1023 that basically provides some evidence that Joe Biden was involved in
Which
a bribery
the FBI
scheme.
has acknowledged the existence of.
They have acknowledged that it exists. What they have also said is they're not going to turn it over to Congress.
Surprise.
So what's in that document? And by the way, how does the FBI just decide, well, we're not going to, this has been subpoenaed, by the way, and the FBI has just told Congress, we're not going to comply with your subpoena. Now what are you going to do?
How do you spell lawless? USA?
Yeah, I mean, we have this idea that we're, this bastion of law, and this is the way it's supposed to work. And the FBI just came back and says, well, you obviously don't have any real valid, this is just some sort of witch hunt. You don't have any valid legislative purpose here, so we're just not going to show it to you. Maybe we'll talk to you about, giving you a summary that has been suitably redacted, but you're not going to see the actual investigation form from the FBI.
We'll see what the courts do. I mean, this is an enforceable subpoena. If the courts do anything less than support the subpoena, I don't know what's going to happen. I got to be honest. We have been descending into lawlessness now for a good 8 years. I mean, you could argue for longer, but solidly in plain view, lawlessness since 2016, 2015, really. I don't know what the next reaction, and I think it's going to be a reaction, is going to be. But if the rule of law cannot be followed, it cannot be enforced, it cannot be observed, why should people pay taxes? Why should people follow the law ever? It's a known thing that it's only enforced against certain people. Then, I mean, you're asking for mass lawlessness. And that it pains me to say that, but I don't see any other outcome. If you know for a fact that your actions will be treated differently than others, purely based on politics or the color of your skin. What faith is there in law anymore?
And by the way, everything we've talked about tonight, every bit of it, every topic has as its root an abrogation of respect for the rule of law.
That's absolutely right. I mean, and that's at the root of all of it, is that our government does not live up to its responsibilities. It is not a government for all people. It is a government for some people. And those who feel left on the outside are eventually going to react to that.
And by
I don't want that. I would really, really not want that.
Yeah. However,
ugly reaction.
Once the FBI came back and said we're not going to comply with your subpoena, the rule of law is dead.
Once the FBI came back and said that Hillary Clinton couldn't be prosecuted, I think that was the last nail.
Yeah. So I no longer believe that this system can be reformed or fixed. I think we are just going to have to sit.
How do you reform it? I mean, like,
I don't know. I think we're just going to have to sit and watch this whole thing crash and burn. I wish there was another.
I disagree with you, Dale. I want to. As much as I'm the optimist to your pessimist, I'm having a hard time with this because it's gotten that bleak. It's gotten that ridiculous that it's so obvious the two tiers of justice that we have, the two tiers of law, the absolute abdication of any kind of media that will report things, and that includes Fox News. Fox News is not your friend, and maybe you like one of the other conservative news,
Newsmax, okay, OAN, whatever.
I mean, look, great. The problem is that you're never going to get the straight ditty from any of them.
No, their whole existence now, and I think Matt Taibbi sort of came out with this about 2 years ago with sort of a reportorial history of how this all came about. Every single news service that you can think of has now switched over to a for-profit model that is based entirely on feeding red meat to a particular demographic, whatever that demographic is.
And I don't disagree with that.
And so nobody's telling the truth. Everybody's telling what their narrative is, or
they're telling half truths and
they're telling
lies at times.
They're telling the narrative that they want, that their selected audience wants to hear.
Everybody is into the narrative.
So we don't have a press or a media in this country with any sort of journalistic objectivity because nobody's reporting.
We do. We have it in the independent press. People like Matt Taibbi, Schellenberg.
Yeah, that's true.
Andy No. There actually are a lot of them out there, but
their reach is limited.
How many people know of them?
Yeah, their reach is limited, and the vast majority of people have never heard of them.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because
when Matt Taibbi
really want to know,
and when Taibbi or Schellenberger come out, like with all these Twitter files things, it just makes a loud thud when it hits the ground because the mainstream media either won't cover it or will just say, well, they didn't really show anything important, so we can ignore it.
The mainstream media hasn't even covered the revelations from Comey, the House, whatever committee. They won't even acknowledge that it exists. That's shameful. Biden is caught in a complete awkward position. And something that should disqualify him, not only from his own presidency, but from even running again. They won't even discuss it. To the point that they do, to the extent that they do it as, well, they never, you showed the headline.
Yeah.
No, well, they didn't prove that he actually had anything to do with
Yeah,
it.
it's just a bunch of GOP bullshit. That's
I
it.
mean,
So you say it
this is
puts
the
Biden.
problem.
You say it puts Biden in the awkward position. He's not in an awkward position. He can just open up
No,
the New
why
York
would they
Times
ever put him in an awkward position?
because the
Even though
media.
he is an absolute fucking moron, has always been a fucking moron. Look, I know his kids. I liked his kids. Well, I like Bo. I didn't really know Hunter. They were not super smart. I'm just they weren't like complete idiots, but they were not super smart. Okay, fine, whatever. Like Hunter is like the smartest person he's ever met. I don't think he even rated academically in our school.
Well, to be fair to Joe Biden, Hunter Biden may be the smartest person that Joe Biden knows. I mean, because Joe Biden certainly isn't the smartest person he's ever met. That doesn't look good. I think Michael just disappeared. We are gonna gonna have to wait to see if he comes back. My response to what Michael said, Joe Biden being in an awkward position. Why are you in an awkward position when you know that the national press is just going to go to bat for you and are going to defend you on the front page of the New York Times? That's not an awkward position. But clearly the government, it's really hard to admit this. As somebody who spent 25 years of my life, nearly 10 of them in uniform, on active duty, working for this country's defense. Michael says, my CPU died all of a sudden. Go ahead and end it. Well, okay, I guess I will. So parting comments, and I guess I'll say my parting comments while I try to furiously find some outro music to play. I think I'll just grab one of the old standards. As I was saying, I've spent 25 years of my life working for the defense of this country. As I said, 10 years of them on active duty, another 15 years working for the Department of Defense, largely as a contractor. It pains me to have to say that the idea that I always had of the U.S. government as being relatively incorruptible, relatively honest, and relatively concerned about the good of the American people simply no longer seems to be true. So the government of, Ronald Reagan, who remains my favorite president of my lifetime, that seems like a far cry from the government we have now. A government that exists not for the American people, but for a small class of political and media actors, all of whom share the same ideology, all of whom share the same ends that are still murky, and we don't actually know what their final desire is other than the maintenance of their own power. And I don't know what that maintenance power means for the average person in this country, but it pains me as someone who has spent so much of his life working for the defense of this country to now know that I've been working for the defense of a country that is, at least in its current state, corrupt and completely unconcerned about the needs and wants and good of its average citizens. And that is a horrific revelation to have to come to terms with. And as I said to Michael, I'm afraid that there is no way to reform the system, that there is no way to fix it. We have built a monstrosity of a machine that we're just going to have to sit and watch it crash and burn, and somehow, in the aftermath, try to figure out some way of rebuilding something of value. So, with that having been said, and with Michael being unavailable due to the crash of his PC, I guess it's time to say goodbye. Have a great week. We will be back next week to talk to you again. Until then, so long.